My name is Colleen Callahan. A lot of people call me Michaeline or Callie. I'm from Florida, live in North Florida. My near-death experience, I should give you a little bit of context. I grew up aware of the presence of a wonderful being who occupied my consciousness and filled me with ecstasies from the age of 5, where I felt I was just dazzling with light all over. And he always guided me to love and forgive and showed me how to see situations differently so that I could not be angry and instead replace anger with compassion. And at the age of 15, I set him aside as imaginary because I saw a lot of information coming back from the environment that said, that's just magical thinking. So I set him aside and I became an empiricist, a scientist, and did a lot of, really did well in school and very focused. But I also tried a lot of drugs and did a lot of risky things. And that was from the age of 15 until 20. At the age of 20 in 1978, I went out to go horseback riding with a friend of mine, horses we had interacted with many times before. And I got on the back of a barrel mare. Those are very maneuverable horses, very responsive. And she was very sweet, that horse. Anyway, so there I am on Ticker's back, and that was the name of the mare. And we're in a hard gallop. And I'm kind of jockey style down over her back, crouched over her neck, crouched low, so her neck was right here to my side, and she could like this, and the saddle kept hitting me in the rear end every time she would stride. That's the posture that I was in, and I was very close behind the stallion, really close. And the little voice in my head that I had set aside as imaginary 5 years before said, "He's kicking." And I said, "So what?" in my head. "He can't get me up here." And then everything slipped into slow motion, really slow motion. And I saw the rump come up and the hooves coming towards my face. And just as the hooves were getting quite close, because it was really only his right rear hoof, but just as it was getting really close, I left my body. I did not stay for the impact. I never felt it. I rolled out of my body going left and went about 100 feet, maybe a little more, might have been as much as 150. Distance doesn't mean much from that state because I was in the astral. I had just left my body. Then I turned and I watched the horse that had been under my body, which was now limp, okay, from where I saw it get kicked. I saw it throw its arms back, just come plow like this, let go of everything. And then it flopped on the horse's rump a couple of times as the horse, in very slow motion strides, ran out from underneath this body. The body landed on its head, and then the hips and the legs hit, and suddenly, just like that, I was in a lustrous vast. Now, people will call it a void, and I don't really think of it as a void, but my experience of it was not that it was black per se. It was black, but it was like velvet. It had a luster like a black pearl, like the light on a black pearl, or like the sheen of gasoline on water. Anyway, and it was all moving, and I felt perfect. I felt absolutely perfect. And I thought to myself, I'm perfect. Nothing can ever hurt me again. And at that point, I became aware that Michael, my guide, whom I had set aside as imaginary, was with me when he said, "Nothing could have ever hurt you to begin with. You are an eternal being." And I said, first of all, I could taste the truth of what he was saying. And it wasn't like on my tongue taste, but the way a scent is wedded to something you eat, like if I say buttered potatoes, you can almost conjure the taste for yourself and the experience of that. Truth has a taste. And when he said things to me, I tasted their verity. I knew they were true right away. And I said, well, if nothing could have ever hurt me to begin with, then why was it all so scary? And he said, well, it was scary because you believed you could suffer loss and die. But that was necessary because if you hadn't believed that, you wouldn't have taken the experience seriously. You wouldn't have learned what you went there to learn, and you wouldn't have done what you went there to do. And I couldn't remember what I went there to do or what I went there to learn. So I said, which was, clue me in. And he said, you went to summon your will. And I thought, summon my will? Well, that's ridiculous. What do you mean by summon my will? Do you mean I went through all of that just to find out what I wanted? And he said, no, you misunderstand me. I have to show you what I mean by the will. Suddenly, I had descended into a memory from my life. And when I say descended into it, I mean I was in the memory reliving it, like people call a flashback. It was a reliving, but in this reliving, I was not only the person I had been, I was a baby 18 months old, but I was also my mother watching the baby that was 18 months old, and I was watching my mother watching the baby, and I was watching the baby I had been. And she had just put my first pair of new shoes on me. We were a poor family. She'd worked very hard to get those shoes for me, and I had never had new shoes. We lived in Florida. It was warm. I was only 18 months old. I was in the house mostly, so I was barefoot most of the time. So I was very upset about these shoes. I thought she had tied me to the floor, and I was laying on the floor just pitching a fit. I felt Mom's emotions about this. She was disappointed I was so upset, but she knew I was just a baby. She understood. She's a little frustrated. She was worried. My God, this kid's a tyrant when she doesn't like something, sort of thing. And feeling it from every angle, I realized, oh my God, those shoes were given to protect my feet. There was a blessing in that horrible situation, as I perceived it at the time, was that the shoes were a really serious blessing in my family for, since we didn't have money. Anyway, so I kind of then ascended in a way. There was no rising sensation to it or anything. It was a simple shifting of attention, and I was back with Michael, and I said, the shoes were given to protect my feet, and all I saw was the uncomfortableness on my feet and the newness of it, and it frightened me, and I made it a terrible experience for myself because of the way I labeled it, because of the way I perceived it, okay? So I said, did I get that right? And he was like, yes, that's exactly right. And so then he showed me another experience that I descended into, and I was being assaulted. I was only 5 years old, and I was being sexually assaulted, in fact, by my granduncle, who was a unknown to my family, disturbed person. And I left my body. And I left my body this several times with this particular man. And every time I left my body, it served to, one, introduce me to my guide, Michael, okay, and to develop that relationship so he could guide me in my thinking. But also I realized that from this, I had discerned that I was not my body. I was not my body. And so the boom from that, as soon as I realized it, and I didn't stay long in this particular vignette from my life because it was so unpleasant. And I'd already done it. I didn't want to go through it again. But what I got out of it right away, I was back with Michael, and I said, okay, so from that, I learned these things, and these things, learning that I'm not my body and that you were with me, and developing that relationship was such a great boon. Had I seen it in those terms at that time, it would have had a completely different experience to me than it did. So now in retrospect, it's like I could I could make a trade. I could redeem the tribulation for the blessings that were in it, and it was forgiven right away. I was no longer angry with my granduncle. Okay, all those years I carried anger in. So there were a couple of more vignettes, and one of them was of my dad switching my legs, and I left my body. And that happened. I recalled that I had left my body many times because of Dad switching me. But I also saw that I had helped him overcome his own demons by causing him to really get in touch with the love in his heart again, because I really didn't do anything that deserved the spankings I was getting. And I also learned, again, I am not my body, because I just kept leaving the body whenever he would spank me. All of these served each one to show me how I had taken the situation, and through my own self-talk and labels, I had actually made it very one-sided, my experience during the actual event. I suffered from it when I could have been instead looking for the boon and trusting there would be a boon. You know, a backyard full of horse poo in your life is a sure sign of ponies that put it there, right? So a big part of what I learned from my NDE at this point was that if we will trust that we are here for learning and for a didactic experience, and that everything that comes to us comes as a boon. If it is also a tribulation, it is also a boon. And you look for the boon to redeem the tribulation, and the tribulation is forgiven and no longer bothers you. And so this is a way Michael has trained me ever since then, and before then too, but now I recognize the pattern of training through the NDE. So at this point, I started this laughter, and I laughed and laughed at the way we trick ourselves, because really, this world is a jest. From the other side, in eternity, in the lustrous past, it is a very, very funny jest in which we disown our power in order to have an experience of powerlessness in a world we create with the labels we're applying. Now that is hysterical, because we're the ones who are creating the experience that we're blaming the world for making us miserable. We did it, but we laugh. We don't laugh. We don't laugh on this side because we don't see ourselves doing it. Okay, but when you do see yourself doing it, making yourself miserable, the laughter comes. And this is also very characteristic of enlightenment too. When the enlightenment comes, you played a joke on myself. So first we laughed, and Michael laughed with me, and then we wept. We wept because not knowing you're doing this to yourself, causing all your own suffering, the situation is what it is. How bad it feels to you is a matter of what you say to yourself about it. So we wept because it's the source of so much suffering. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is so clear. I must be dying. Am I dying? Said I to Michael, and he said, well, your body's laying in a field with serious head trauma, and if you can't make it stand up, it will cease because the brain will swell. And I said, well, I have to go back, Michael. I have to tell everyone. I have to tell them so they learn how to not suffer with the things that are difficult in their life. They learn instead to turn them into blessings that make them more powerful and more peaceful. And he was like, well, you know, if you want to go back, the only way to go back and keep everything in memory that you learned here is to go back through the last moment. Now, this is really critical information. He said, you can go back through any moment you want. You can go back and avoid the accident by coming back before it, but then you won't remember anything you learned here because it won't be part of that time stream. If the accident doesn't occur, you can't have memories of it. The only way to keep your memory is to go back into the damaged body. Okay? Now, I didn't hesitate. I had to go back. I wanted to go back. This was such valuable information that I was just compelled. So I said, okay, so how do I do it? Because the world is just a dream. from the lustrous vast. It's a dream like any other dream, and they're tricky to get back into at times, right? We've all tried it. And he said, well, you have to remember the last moment you were in your body, and then summon your will to return. And that's what I did. I remembered the horse's rump rising and him saying, he's kicking, and me saying, so what? So suddenly there was a gusting of wind. Whoosh is what it felt like. Just a whoosh. That was me apparently re-inhabiting my body, just this whoosh sound. And I was back in the body. Now, I started struggling right away to get up, and there was a girl there with me we were going to ride together, Tammy, and she kept trying to hold me down. She said, you're really injured, and stay down. And I knew Michael had told me I had to stand up, that if I didn't stand up, the body would cease. And I kept fighting her, and she said I wasn't even looking at her at that time and wouldn't listen to her. And then she tells me, I looked her straight in the eye and said very calmly, Tammy, I have to stand up. Help me to my feet. And then I began to wake up and have memories. I have memories of struggling to get to my feet. It took us 3 tries to coordinate our efforts. And I was intermittent asleep, unconscious, even though I was waxy catatonic, appeared to be awake, but just for off and on for about 18 hours after that. And I was stupid for 18 months. I couldn't learn anything new. I say stupid. I still had all my old long-term memories. I still remembered everything that happened in the lustrous void. I was like it was tacked to my psyche so I could bring it back. The world teaches you that you are your parents, you are your family, you are your house, you are your toys, you are your mind, you are your education, your experiences, your accomplishments, your pets. The world teaches you to identify as all sorts of things that you are not. You are consciousness. You are awareness itself. Life is conscious and aware of itself, and you are an extension of that consciousness, gifted by the primary source consciousness we call God, with every ability that God has. You just have a less developed version of it. He has imagined and kept perfect forever in his mind space all of this and all of us. And he has designed us so that we can do the same thing and build worlds and build inner worlds. There is no world factually out there. The world is actually projected as a product of the labels you assign. You, the consciousness, need to supervise your mind. Otherwise, your mind, which has been trained to think of you as your house, your parents, your pets, your possessions, your roles, your story, your mind. The mind wants you to think you are the mind, not because if there's any malice there, or any intention to do anything nefarious or anything at all. It's just you've mistaken yourself for your mind all your life, and the mind has kind of run away with your credit card for creation. You know, we all have a credit card that's unlimited for creating reality for ourselves, and the mind takes that and pretends to be you and plugs it into the universal matrix of perception and creates an experience for you that's governed by the things you're saying to yourself. So you, consciousness, need to supervise your mind. It's like a puppy. It needs something to chew on. So when you can't make it just be still, give it a project or something constructive to do. Don't worry. Worry is borrowing with your mind a future that may never occur. If you're so uncomfortable and you're present circumstances so bored that you have to borrow from possible outcomes, borrow from outcomes you like, borrow from things you want to occur, and worry about those instead. When I say worry, I mean imagifest them, picture, feel, smell, hear, taste that experience you want to have. You're already making it real for yourself. Just the way when you worry, you make an outcome you don't want feel real and present. You can use that same godly estate that Source Creator gave us all to create, to manifest the things you do want. And then they're much more likely to occur. And yeah, so that's what happened with my NDE. And here I am 45 years later, just really beginning to pursue bringing it to the world, because the world wasn't ready for NDEs in 1978. They weren't really not ready.